For this lesson, I'll be recording voiceover as we watch a time lapse of my process. The reason I'm doing it this way is because I kind of freestyled as I was going, and I couldn't really explain my process as I was experimenting very well. So for this one, you'll just be listening to me as I watch with you in my process. So starting out, I'll make a human figure. This will make sure I have all the proportions correct. And then next, because we're making a worm, I dropped a cylinder in there and turned off the caps. And this will be the body of the worm. And as I'm building, I'm not too worried about having too many polygons because we'll optimize it later. So here I'm using a shrink wrap to try to fit that cylinder to the figure. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work very well as the figure maybe is too small or there's not enough polygons on the cylinder. So I try a few things here and end up not really using the shrink wrap, but you can see my process anyway. Here I'm just trying to fit it before I start shrink wrapping, and as you can see, it's kind of crunching together. It's not really doing what I was hoping it would do. And so in the end, I just manually shrunk each of these edge loops. And to select a whole edge loop, you just double click it and it should select everything that is kind of a constant edge flow. And for the neck area, I knew I'd want it to be curling forward as the kind of lips and mouth of the worm are facing forward and not straight up. So here I'm pulling the back points up. And now I'm using soft selection to move multiple points at a time, and that does it kind of softly. So the point you have selected moves exactly how you want, and then everything falls off from that. And that's available over on the right side in that soft selection area. Now I just subdivided it by 1 just to give me some more polygons to work with. And now I switched over to the Sculpt Layout, and you can see that stack of tools on the right there. So I'm using smooth and grab and eventually the wax brush to kind of push and pull this a little bit more organically rather than doing it one point at a time. And normally it would be a good idea to use Symmetry when doing something like this, but because I wanted the worm to be kind of lumpy and not really symmetrical at all, that's why I'm doing all of this kind of a little bit more laboriously. Here I'm starting to contour the mouth and the lips. And using the smooth brush, I'm just kind of ironing out a few of those sharper edges. And you have to be careful when using the smooth brush on a face or a polygon that's right on the edge, because it'll kind of eat away at it. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get these lips to kind of wrap around, and I didn't really have a good sketch or reference to go off of. I was really just freestyling, so you'll see me experimenting a little bit here. And a nice thing you can do with soft selection is if you have a point and then you rotate it, it kind of curls that face in and the surrounding faces, and so you can kind of wrap stuff around really nicely that way. And the goal with this mouth is to have the face mesh and spark just fit inside of there. So that's why I'm using that human figure as a reference as I'm going. And here I decided this top area should be closed because that'll be kind of the head or the face of the worm. And I used a make quad option, which is part of the HB modeling bundle. So that's a separate add-on to Cinema 4D. And now I'm just smoothing things out a little bit more. And there you can see when the smooth brush is selected, those edges really get peeled away if they're right on the edge or a boundary. Now for the lips, I'm trying to figure out how to extrude this and get a nice thickness while making it even. And at first I just extruded those edges, and that didn't work. because it's such an odd shape, we're going to have to do something different. So now you can see I'm using a cloth surface to make thickness, and that's a really good way to add thickness to any object in Cinema because it uses the normal information in each polygon to push or pull the surface. You get this really easy thickness for any model. Now I collapsed that cloth object just to make it a single object again. So here I added a subdivision surface to double the geometry, and then I just baked that down, because now I'm going to start sculpting in some details on this mesh, so I needed extra geometry for that. And using the wax brush, which is similar to ZBrush, that it just kind of adds a flat layer or kind of builds up wherever you draw on. So here I'm just giving the lips a little bit of texture and detail. And I'm definitely not a pro sculptor, so you're not going to be seeing any amazing sculpts out of this, but it's just me kind of getting the base shape in there. And here I'm going to turn on symmetry, and that way I can double my efforts. And now I'm starting to think about how I'm going to pull the teeth out of these lips. So I'm just using the grab brush, and I'm just literally pulling these edges out. In ZBrush, you'd probably use an alpha to do this kind of depth, where you could get a preset kind of alpha pack that has ears and noses and that sort of thing. But because I'm just doing this rough and dirty, we're just using the grab brush a lot. And here I'm using the knife tool, and the knife is a really good way to kind of cut into things and make sharper edges. So I'm adding some wrinkles up in the mouth area, and also adding some kind of segmentation like a worm would have. And using a Wacom would have definitely been better for this, but sometimes I'm just lazy and use the mouse. Now for this front area, I want to add a little bit of like dot or little spine things. So I'm going to be using the pull brush, it looks like, and just pulling out a few little bumps here. And to make the bumps sharper, I'm changing the fall off so it's very pointy. So now I get these nice kind of spine bumps. And I'm just single clicking to make those. And all of this is dependent on the resolution of the mesh. If this was a super low poly model, none of this would really work. These brushes would just tear apart the geometry. Now with the grab tool, I'm just kind of repositioning the lips and sharpening those corners. And now I'm trying to delete the inside faces. At first I don't have any luck because there's a sculpt tag on this object, and that kind of prevents you from modifying the underlying geometry. So I have to go in and freeze that. And then it looks like I duplicated the model too, just kind of as a backup. So now you can see I was able to delete that loop, and using the edge tool, I was able to fill the bottom of that. So that let me delete everything inside. Now I'm preparing to optimize this and bake the normals. So I'm making a high and a low poly version. And to make the low poly version, I'm going to use Quad Remesher. And this is a separate program or plugin for Cinema 4D. It doesn't come standard. but it's definitely way better than the included tools in Cinema for retopology, at least automatically. And I have to try a few times because ideally those teeth would stay in there and everything else would be really optimized, but you can see the teeth are getting totally eaten away during the quad remeshing process. So I try a few different techniques here. And in Spark, you want to try to keep polygon counts under, I think 20,000 is usually a good one. Ideally, it's closer to 5 or 10,000 just so you have extra space to work in and you're not bogging it down too much. Another option in Quad Remesher allows you to paint where you want higher or lower detail. And so I'm trying this out where I'm just painting on this vertex map. And I looked at the documentation and it was saying that red colors should subdivide a little bit more, should actually be double what the average is. So that's what I'm trying here. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work out in the end, but I had to give it a shot. As you can see, the teeth are still totally eaten away. So as a kind of last-ditch effort, I think this is probably the final one. I'm exporting, or I'm converting it to 10,000 polygons, which looks pretty good. I want to make sure the low poly matches the high poly as close as possible. So right now I'm manually pulling the polygons of the low model to match the high resolution mesh. And I added a tag on the high res mesh so it is only visible in the wireframe, so I can kind of see what I'm doing and as I'm filling it out. And again, I have soft selection enabled there, so I was able to pull those in a nice smooth way. And now because we subdivided this so much, I'm going back and selecting edge loops that I'm going to eventually delete. Especially near the bottom of this, we don't need nearly as much geometry. And I opened up the project information window so I can see the total polygons I'm working with. And so you can see on this bottom section, I'm deleting 2 out of every 3 edge loop. And eventually on the top, I'll be deleting every other edge loop. So now I have the low poly mesh and the high poly mesh. So I'm exporting both of these as FBXs. And now we're going to hop into Substance Painter. And I want to work on the low poly mesh in Substance, so that's the one you drag in. And we didn't make UVs, so I enabled auto UV in Substance, so it unwrapped it fairly well. It's maybe not the most efficient way, but it did a decent job. Now I selected the high-res mesh when doing the bake mesh maps, so I was able to pull in all that normal information, even though we're still using the low poly mesh in here. And using the AO map, I'm pulling that into a fill layer to add some shadows to the mouth area and around all the kind of crevices. And in Substance Source, I'm pulling in a couple different materials. There's one that's kind of fleshy and another will be for the teeth. And you can see I'm in the organic tab of Substance Source, so all these are kind of either fleshy or animally. And this reptilian alien skin, I think, is what I end up going with. And just by clicking that button, it sends it directly to Substance Painter, which is awesome. And I'm switching to triplanar projection since the UVs aren't totally perfect and we just want to smooth it out and have no seams. And it comes with a couple preset colors, but I ended up just making my own there because none of them were kind of a sandy color. And the material was a little confusing because you can see the two colors I have set there come out really purple, so I had to kind of adjust those until it matched a little bit better to what I was looking for. And that's the beauty of using Substance materials, is that if they're built in Substance Designer, they have a lot of options that kind of come with it, depending on who created it and how they made it accessible. So it's a great way to just hop in and get a quick start on any material. Now I'm looking for some tooth or teeth materials. So I'm dragging that on top, and I'll need to use a mask or a mat to only select where the teeth are. So again, I'm using triplanar projection just to kind of make that seamless. And then with the black mat created, I'm just painting on white where I want the teeth to show. And this one also comes with 3 different presets. And the fun thing about painting on different materials like this is you can see the normal maps changing as I'm painting. So the skin is kind of a little bit higher than the teeth, so you get that inset look. And in order to make those teeth a little bit more inset, I made an empty fill layer and I turned off all the channels except for height. So now you can see as I push and pull that, the teeth get a little bit more inset, or the flesh kind of overlaps them more. And I did copy the mask from the tooth layer onto that so that I didn't have to repaint it. And I do love shiny objects, but in this case I figured the worm would be a lot more matte, so the roughness has turned out pretty high on this. Now I'm adding a black fill layer and then using a light generator to kind of fake some shadows or some shading on this. So the bottom faces now are a little bit darker. Here I'm just kind of brainstorming, seeing if there's any alphas that would make sense. Because alphas are a really nice way to add some depth or some normal map information, like we did earlier in this course. And I thought these wrinkles might look kind of cool, but in the end they did not. And maybe there's a better way to do that, but I was kind of happy with how it was looking already, so I just undid that and moved on. So now I'm just exporting the textures using the Spark preset. That way we get the diffuse, normal, and the ORM. And as usual, I use Crushy to optimize these. Looks like they went from 2.7 megabytes down to, let's see, what's it going to be? Down to 900 kilobytes, which is still a little bit heavy, but we only have one object and these 3 textures, so that's okay. And because we did the unwrap in Substance, we need to make sure we export that model, because the low-res mesh didn't have UV, so in Cinema we still have the not unwrapped model. So here I'm just exporting that, and then just dragging it into Cinema just to double check everything's working. So now I can confirm that the textures line up and everything looks good.